When Richard Petty, 7 championships, 200 wins, the greatest name in this sport's history, personally calls you out on his own podcast, the entire NASCAR world stops and pays attention. That is exactly what happened after Bubba Wallace triggered one of the most chaotic and talked about wrecks of the 2026 Cup Series season at Martinsville Speedway. And Petty was not alone in his reaction. By Monday morning, former champions, broadcast analysts, and even Wallace's own crew were lined up saying the same thing: this one was self-inflicted, and it may have just blown up one of the most promising championship campaigns of Bubba Wallace's career. This is everything that happened: the wreck, the fallout, the reactions, and what it tells us about where Wallace's head is right now. Martinsville Speedway is the oldest track on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. Half a mile of flat, tight, unforgiving paperclip asphalt where tempers run hot and mistakes get punished immediately. Sunday's Cookout 400 had been a competitive race, solid action, normal Martinsville chaos, right up until lap 324, when everything fell apart. To understand the wreck, you have to go back one lap earlier to the restart, because that is where the chain of events actually began. Carson Hocevar, running the number 77 Chevrolet for Spire Motorsports, made a bold move. He went 3 wide underneath Bubba Wallace heading into Turn 1. There was slight contact, Hocevar got the better of it, and he came out of Turn 2 ahead of Wallace. On a short track, on a restart, with a championship on the line, that is hard racing. That is Martinsville. But Wallace did not see it that way. Coming into Turn 3, Wallace tucked right in behind Hocevar and gave him a shove, then another. He kept pushing into the back of the 77 car through Turn 3 and into Turn 4, not once, not twice, but multiple times, deliberately driving into the rear of Hocevar's Chevrolet. When they came off Turn 4 onto the front stretch, Hocevar's car finally snapped around, and the carnage that followed was staggering. 12 cars were collected in that single moment of frustration. Daniel Suarez, Chris Buescher, Austin Dillon, Austin Hill, Zane Smith, John Hunter Nemechek, Eric Jones, Michael McDowell, Connor Zilisch, and even Wallace's own teammate Riley Herbst, all got swept up in one move. 12 cars, multiple careers worth of machinery, all damaged because of what unfolded in those few seconds between Turns 3 and 4. Here is where the stories of the two drivers involved go in completely opposite directions. Hocevar's team worked on his damaged car just enough to keep him in the race. He stayed on the lead lap, clawed his way back through the field, and finished 17th, a result that tied his best ever finish at Martinsville. The man whose car just got punted down the front stretch finished better than most of the people who were collected in the wreck. That result says everything about Hocevar's resilience and composure under pressure. Wallace had no such luck. His car was done. He finished 36th, a DNF, his first of the 2026 season. He had to visit the infield care center before he could even address the media. When he did speak, he walked straight up to Fox Sports' Jamie Little on pit road and addressed it directly. Wallace said he misjudged the situation, that he didn't appreciate the 3-wide move, but that he did not mean to turn Hocevar, calling it a mistake in the heat of the moment. A significant portion of the NASCAR community watching those replays were not buying that explanation, and the biggest voices in the sport made sure everyone heard their verdict. Richard Petty was at Martinsville on Sunday. He watched the entire incident unfold right in front of him. And on Monday, he went on his podcast, The Petty Race Recap, and said exactly what he thought, without softening a single word. His co-host Dale Inman opened the conversation gently, suggesting that Wallace kind of got into the 77. Petty shut that framing down immediately. The King's response was direct: Hocevar didn't just get bumped, Wallace drove straight through his door. That is Richard Petty. 7 championships. The most respected voice this sport has produced. When he talks, the garage listens. What he said at that moment carried a message that went well beyond one crash at one race. It was a statement about what kind of racing is acceptable and what crosses the line. Kevin Harvick, working the Fox broadcast live as it happened, echoed the same sentiment in real time. He pointed out that Wallace drove directly through the 77 car and suggested that something deeper was going on with Wallace that afternoon. Harvick noted that Wallace had been struggling through the race before the contact even happened. It wasn't like he was leading and got loose. He was already frustrated, and the 3-wide move was the spark that lit a fuse that had been burning all afternoon. When two of the sharpest analytical minds in NASCAR, one a 7-time champion, one a former Cup Series champion, both arrive at the same conclusion independently, that is not coincidence. That is the sport collectively telling you something went seriously wrong. Kyle Petty, Richard's son and a longtime NASCAR analyst, took the conversation somewhere nobody else was willing to go. On the Inside the Race podcast, Kyle did not just discuss the wreck itself, he talked about what has been building inside Bubba Wallace's season and why Martinsville may have been the place where it all came spilling out. Kyle admitted he has been in Wallace's exact position before. He has been wrecked, he has wrecked people, and he knows firsthand what frustration does to a driver's judgment behind the wheel. But then he raised something that completely reframes this entire story: Tyler Reddick, Wallace's own teammate. Reddick became the first driver in NASCAR Cup Series history to win the first 3 races of a season, then won 4 of the first 6. That is a level of dominance this sport has never seen from one driver in real time. Wallace was suiting up every weekend, preparing all week, showing up to the track with the same equipment and resources, and watching his teammate lap the competition while he was grinding for top 15 finishes. Kyle Petty said that eats at you. He said it directly: you race your teammates. You want to be the best car in your own building. And when you're not, when week after week the guy with the same number on his pit box is making history while you're sliding backward, that pent-up pressure doesn't just disappear. It sits inside you. And sometimes, on a bad afternoon at a tight, unforgiving track like Martinsville, it comes out at the wrong moment. Kyle Petty was not excusing what Wallace did. He was explaining it. And that explanation makes the moment feel significantly heavier, because this was not just one bad decision made in isolation. It may have been the result of weeks of quiet, building pressure finally finding a way out. Kyle Petty made one more point in that conversation that deserves its own spotlight, and it concerns Carson Hocevar directly. Hocevar has a well-known reputation on track. They call him Hurricane Hocevar for a reason. He is aggressive, he races for every inch, and over the past year or so he has been involved in more than a few incidents that drew criticism from drivers and analysts alike. The instinct for a large part of the NASCAR audience when something happens near Hocevar is to assume he had it coming in some form or another. Kyle Petty pushed back on that hard. He said going 3 wide at Martinsville is not a punishable offense. That's short track racing. Hocevar made a bold move on a restart, executed it, and moved on. What happened next was not on him. That is a critical distinction. Making an aggressive but clean racing move on a restart is exactly what every driver at Martinsville is supposed to do. The reaction that followed that move is what became the story. Steve Letarte, another respected NASCAR analyst, offered a slightly different read on the situation. Letarte believes Wallace intended to make contact with Hocevar, just not to the degree that it caused a 12-car wreck. Letarte's read is that Wallace wanted to give him a bump to make a point, the way drivers have done at short tracks forever, but simply pushed way too hard on the gas, still a misjudgment, just one with more intent behind it than Wallace admitted publicly. The distinction between those two readings is meaningful, because one is a pure accident and the other is a controlled statement that got out of hand. Both are damaging, but in different ways. The most painful voice in this entire story was not Richard Petty. It was not Kyle Petty or Kevin Harvick. It was Freddie Kraft, Bubba Wallace's own spotter, who went on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and was as candid as a crew member can possibly be about their own driver. Kraft said there's no sugarcoating it. He took Wallace at his word that it was a misjudgment, but he made clear that if it was a misjudgment, it was a catastrophic one, and the damage it caused is real and lasting. That kind of transparency from inside a team is genuinely rare in professional motorsport, and it signals how serious this moment truly is. Then Kraft laid out the championship math in plain terms. Wallace came into Martinsville sitting 3rd in the Cup Series standings. He had 4 finishes of 11th or better in his first 5 races. At one point this season he sat 2nd in the standings. He was a legitimate championship contender. After back-to-back DNFs at Darlington and now Martinsville, he has fallen to 11th in the standings. The early season work, all of it, has been partially undone in the span of 2 weekends. Kraft's word for it was direct, self-inflicted. Not a mechanical failure. Not a flat tire. Not someone else losing control and collecting the 23 car. Wallace drove himself out of contention for a chunk of his own season, and the people closest to him aren't pretending otherwise. The season is not over. 11th in points is not a death sentence, and Wallace demonstrated in the first 5 races that he has the speed and the consistency to compete at the front. But the margin for error in a legitimate championship run is thin, and Wallace used up a significant amount of that margin in one afternoon at Martinsville. The path forward demands consistency, patience, and, based on everything Kraft and the Pettys communicated this week, a genuine mental reset before the next race weekend. Martinsville is Wallace's favorite track. He has won there twice in the Truck Series and knows every inch of that half-mile layout. And yet it was Martinsville that bit him harder than anywhere else this season. That's what Kraft meant when he said that track doesn't owe you anything. History at a place doesn't guarantee results. Emotion on a restart does nothing but cost you. Wallace is talented enough to recover from this. The real question now is whether Sunday was an isolated moment of frustration that gets left at Martinsville, or whether it points to something that needs to be addressed before it costs him anything further in the 2026 season. If you want to stay on top of every move, every wreck, and every storyline as this 2026 Cup Series season unfolds, hit that like button and subscribe right now. We break down the races, the rivalries, and the real conversations happening inside this sport every single week. Turn on notifications so you never fall behind, because in a season this wild, you cannot afford to miss a single update.